Time to talk about my December reads, starting with my 3-star reviews. Farm Animals by Ericmore. This is an extreme horror story that's bordering between novel and novella at like 125 pages. I did read Cult last year and it ended up on my worst reads of the year, but I wanted to give Ericmore another try, and I've sort of been keeping an eye on what he's publishing to find something else that would appeal to me. This one being about twisted farmers out in the countryside gave me like sort of cultish vibes, wondering like if it was a singular family or a whole small town, and also like what level of extremity were we doing here where we're treating people like animals, and then also thematically if we're treating people like animals there's a couple of extra layers and elements and questions we could be asking. So I felt like any kind of extreme gore or horror would pair well with those topics, sort of a la Tender is the Flesh. And before any of y'all get your hopes up, this book is really just trying to be extreme and edgy to shock. Same way I felt like there was a bait and switch in Cult, I think there's a little bit of a bait and switch here in Farm Animals too, because the summary like heavily implies cannibalism, and there is one character, Daisy. The way that they are written makes you think one way when something else is going on, and it was pretty obvious to me. Then I just felt like it was so odd we're getting this very humanized perspective from them. Overall, it was just disappointing because I really wanted it to be something else entirely. I'm trying not to give away spoilers here a little bit if you can't tell from sort of this vague conversation. I do still think that this is better than Cult because there was an actual attempt to appeal emotionally to the reader and make connections, where I feel like Cult, I just did not connect with any of these characters or care about them at all. And I do think Ericmore has a type of story he likes to tell, because Farm Animals is very similar to Cult. There were a couple of plots happening at the same time and they didn't really very well align, and I don't know if he was trying to like seed out like some red herrings or whatever. It did feel like some of the stuff that we got was unneeded, so even if you wanted to keep it to the same page count, you could have done that by cutting some of these dangling threads and really honing in on what you wanted to do. Lastly, and probably like most offensively for most of the extreme horror community, I felt like the gore was just not there. There wasn't a level of intensity of description. There were times when he could have really gone someplace and I felt like he was backing off as an author and like stepping back from like what could have been horrific. Something that leaves me feeling like not great about reading from this author is it seems like he has no respect for content warning. So within his summary, he wrote that this content will undoubtedly upset those with delicate sensibilities. Consider this a trigger warning for everything. And guys, this doesn't need a trigger warning for everything. Stuff that's not in this book, there's no self-mutilation, there's no partner abuse, they are not doing anything with eyes at all, and there's very light content warning for some mild teeth stuff. There's no on-page abuse of minors, though it's implied. There's no animal abuse. There's no cannibalism, though I suppose he doesn't want to tell us that because he implies in the summary there will be. These summaries as a whole are a little bit of a bait and switch, kind of hoping to catch you off guard more than he is to actually give you something gory and shocking in and of itself. Because of that, he cannot give you trigger warning, which, like, fine, everyone has their own style, their own way to entice readers. Like, I am not judging that, but I am judging this very dismissive, pretentious kind of content warning, calling everyone who doesn't like his work someone with delicate sensibilities. Next is going to be The Wild Wolf's Rejected Mate by Cate C. Wells. This one came out on December 26th, and I didn't finish reading it until the 29th, which sort of lets you know that I wasn't that into it. And generally, it does have me wondering if maybe I'm just done with the 5-pack series. And because a lot of the things I didn't like in this book have been an issue in the whole series, it's like I've just hit my cap limit on it. It's just these books are very bioessential, and I've been willing to let all the baby making go, all the women are like this and men are like this, and the way that's set up in their society to mean that there can be no gay or lesbian couples, just been letting that go. I've been letting all the obsession with the baby making going on and that being the higher purpose and the whole point of it. I feel like we've hit max capacity because there is this character, Kennedy, perceived as female in her human form and perceived as male in her wolf form. And I've sort of been kind of hoping that we were going to do something interesting with that character and been anxiously waiting for more something with it. And in this one, the main love interest, Justice, keeps referring to her as the sacred wolf or the sacred one. And that just made me feel super gross about the whole situation because it felt like a trope setting up the mystical trans or the mystical non-binary person in the room. And in a lot of ways, it's reinforcing some of this bioessentialism them because Kennedy is able to escape the roles that other femme-presenting people have because she has a masculine presenting wolf. And again, that brings it back to like the biology. This book also gives us a lot more of like the Killian Kelly redemption arc, and I hate Killian and I'm never gonna forgive him for how he treated Una. Like, I'm glad she's happy, I'm glad that he's better than what there was before, but guess what? He still fucking sucks. And I don't understand why we have to keep like this redemption arc where everyone likes him, he's secretly a good guy even though he's really like He-Man bro-y. Like, no. When you're dismissive of women and what they want, when you feel you can control where they go, what they say, what they do, who they hang out with, just not okay. And I don't like you being presented as like a good guy or a progressive guy. Also, the whole like redemption of the last pack here doesn't work for me because they do steal females from other packs. And even though the women are quote unquote happy now or whatever, that doesn't justify treating them like objects. And Justice, along with like a lot of his other like pack brethren, try to sort of like rewrite and justify what they're doing by like explaining the other packs are wrong and treating these women poorly and stuff. But the fact that they treat these women like objects that they can just up and take and then tell them that they're gonna stay here and just do things a different way without giving them any of their own autonomy means that they don't really get what's wrong with the poor treatment from the other packs either. And you can't do a two wrongs make a right cancel each other out. Also, you know, in the first book, the last pack was used as like attempting to steal unmated females from Killian Kelly's pack as like a major plot point, and they had like this big vicious fight over it. And this book, instead of like pretending that didn't happen, tries to rewrite the encounter and justify it retroactively. And that just doesn't work at all for me either, especially because they're not acknowledging what they did was wrong or like even out of character for this pack. I don't know, this book is attempting to deconstruct a lot of things, but in doing that, it's reinforcing a bunch of things I don't like. Probably closer to a 2-star read for me than a 3-star read, but I mean, I did read all the way to the end and there were moments in it and it was decently written, so I think that's why it's sitting here at 3. Moving into 4 stars. Tasting History by Max Miller and Anne Volkwine. This is a nonfiction, historically accurate recipe book that's giving you tasting notes all the way from Babylonian times and through some more historic periods. I thought it was cool. It gave me like some fun, interesting little facts here and there, some fun recipes, several which I thought would be pretty easy for me to try in modern times. I wish there had been a table of contents in the book, and even though I understand why they ordered the recipes from oldest to most current, I wish they had done it in a different way, like, you know, main dishes and side dishes, breads, vegetarian versus meat, like something like that, which would be like more effectively useful for a cookbook versus where it's all sort of like hodgepodge together and you have to go through history finding something that might appeal. You know, but I did like that the book acknowledges changes to crops over time, lost seasoning and ingredients, how different words have meant different things historically. And I do feel like connecting to history through food is like really meaningful and gives someone like a better sense of culture and lifestyle than just listening to someone tell them about day-to-day life. But overall, I did find the historic elements within the story a bit shallow. It often felt like what they were telling me was a stretch or not even directly connected to the recipe on hand. Even with that overall impression, there were individual moments where this really connected and worked and was an interesting, engaging read. I think they could have done a little bit more to connect it though. Like, they do talk a little bit about cheap husbandry in ancient times and how that was done. And like, if they really wanted to connect it, they could have done that like by talking about how mass farming happens now in modern times and the differences there. And if that's like a little too animal rightsy, I also noticed that barley is treated like an ingredient in ancient Babylonian and ancient Greece, the same way we treat like flour today. So like a little bit about like the main agricultural crops and how they've shifted olden times versus modern times would have really been appreciated, and I think would have added a lot of oomph to what they were trying to do. And then lastly, this book is apparently connected to like a YouTube channel, so I I did find like a fun new YouTube channel to look at as well. It's always fun to watch people cook and to like get that little bit of experimentation and good time. Next is going to be Camp Damascus by Tingle. I did read and finish this the weekend before the Weirdo Book Club announced it was their book club read, and I was so disappointed because I would have loved to talk it through a little bit more with some folks chapter by chapter. As it stood, I thought it was very fun and original. It does a good job deconstructing several different religious elements that people have to sort of live with or work through if they're raised in a strict religion. And I think it does a good job like addressing the damage that's done to people and like making it like visual and obvious to everyone through a supernatural means here, where I think a lot of times people deny that it was that bad or that anyone was really hurt. I liked too that our character was neurodiverse, was aware that she was neurodiverse, everyone around her was aware of that, and they were still treating her like pretty normally and just like acknowledging that this is how she interacts with people. There are some individual moments, like her mom doesn't let her do her counting fingers tick or whatever, and I just thought that was like really weird in her mom's part because she's a very socially awkward, abrupt, sort of like weird kind of character compared to like what's neurally more stereotypical. And her mom allows all of that and seems fine with it, even like just meets her where she is. But this like finger counting take is the bridge too far. I'm not saying that she needs to change socially, for the record. I think it's fine. She's interacting how she feels she should as best she can. I just think it's really weird they didn't try to quote unquote fix that, but they did want to make her stop her number counting tick. There's a lot of discussion about the scenery, and Montana sounds like a beautiful state that I'd like to visit at some point in time. I think this is a great debut horror from Tingle. I know he's written other sort of like parody stories before this, but I think this is his first in horror. Generally, the pacing, the theming, the tension worked for me, but I do feel like it was missing like a little bit of oomph or push that I usually expect in horror novels. I don't even know how to describe it because it executes really well, but there just was something missing in that ingredient pool that I can't quite put my finger on. Which leads me into 5-star reads. You Let Me In by Camilla Bruce. This is what you get when you mash up a gothic horror with a fae paranormal romance. And the romance is horrific and awful, as one would expect within a horror novel, but there's also something about it that's like alluring and sweet. The story is told in an epistolary style. The main character has gone missing, and a year from her going missing, her niece and her nephew are to go to her house and read a manuscript she left for them that's going to have a password in it they'll use to collect their inheritance. So we get a couple news articles explaining her disappearance, explaining that she has like a pretty tragic life in general, with like some very like jagged edge moments. And then we have the manuscript where she's talking to her niece and nephew and explaining her childhood, her adult life, how she saw those experiences, what she believes happened, all of that kind of stuff. Ends in like this twisted way at the back end. And I really liked it because like being in Fae or Otherworld, or being able to walk between the veil and see like the human reality and the Fae reality, she does have like this magical sense of being in between, and of like her talking about what her therapist thinks happens versus what she knows happened, leaving the possibility open that maybe her therapist is right and maybe she's right, and it not upsetting her or changing how she's acting, but at the same time leaving space for that to potentially be the situation. I love it because I think you could talk about it in terms of extreme horror because it's dark and gory and intense and repulsive, but it's also really whimsical and sweet and alluring. It has these beautiful and glorious moments to it too. It's full of angst and that little bit of presumptive over self-indulgence from the main character, exactly what you would expect from a moody gothic lead, but it's written with such flair and style, and the things that are happening to her are so awful and heartbreaking that a little bit you just want to root for her anyways and are glad that she is there with her own like sense of self at the end. This is everything I never knew I wanted but I needed in a book, all in a very short little self-contained package. It is so cottagecore coded. If it acknowledges acknowledged all the slime and the gore and the mess and the dirt and the decay that comes with living in the woods and living off the land. This embodies everything I love about the Fae, and it really incorporates all those old stories and myths, but owns it in this beautiful new modern story. Like, it never feels out of time or place. It has this very timeless quality to it. If you're looking for a pretty short modern gothic tale, this is it for you. You should definitely pick it up. And that's going to be everything I read this past December. It was kind of a shorter list, but you know, December is very busy. But talk to me in those comments down below. What was your favorite read this past month? And give me a little summary of why. And as always, keep reading.